For more on this topic, we're joined with British investigative journalist Tony Gosling. So Britain's armed forces chief says NATO must intensify its attacks on Libya, targeting Gaddafi's infrastructure. Do you think the UK's focus is more aligned to killing Gaddafi rather than bringing him to court?
Well, I'm flabbergasted by this announcement because actually this is a political decision. It should never be a military decision. I think the reason that the military chief has announced it is really to save the face of our politicians here in Britain, who are pushing this whole matter way beyond what was agreed at the United Nations Security Council. That is a serious problem, and this is why the Russians and others are now saying there must be a ceasefire. Actually, a ceasefire exactly is what everybody around the rest of the world is calling for. So why is it that the British military are deciding to up the ante against Gaddafi? Of course, if they decide they want to bomb the infrastructure, this is, I would consider, a war crime under the present situation, and it goes way outside the present UN resolution. Why is it, we have to ask ourselves, that the British and NATO particularly, this is a NATO initiative now, have decided that they want to intervene so heavily in this civil war, rather than let the Libyan people decide for themselves the outcome of how they want the politics in their country to be in the future?
Now, Britain's defense secretary says NATO is prepared for a lengthy campaign in Libya. Do you think Russia's efforts can bring both Gaddafi's regime and the rebels to a real ceasefire while NATO tries to bomb one side into submission? I mean, before, Gaddafi has said that he wants a ceasefire, and then it turns out it doesn't happen. So do you think this next step in Russia can work?
Well, I do hope so, but the idea that they are prepared for a long campaign, I think that's actually what they want. NATO has shown in other campaigns around the world that it starts off with this sort of pretense that they want to have a short, sharp war, and what happens is it turns into a long, protracted war where actually who does run out of this? The military industrial complex, these massive military companies who are supplying all this weaponry to NATO are the people who do best out of it. And in fact, both sides, military companies from both sides do well. So I think that I don't think that the NATO side really want to make this a short thing at all. They actually would like a long, protracted conflict, and they would like ultimately to take control of Libya's oil and Libya's finances, which is what this is all about.
Do you see Gaddafi being brought to justice? Do you see him before the court in The Hague?
Well, what I'd like to see, rather than Colonel Gaddafi, who is a sort of moderate leader, really a despotic leader, but actually nowhere near as bad as the kind of things that we're seeing from NATO right now. We don't see Colonel Gaddafi going into foreign countries, invading them, bombing them, attacking them. We don't see these long protracted wars carried out by Colonel Gaddafi. I think he's the least of our problems, and we should see Tony Blair and George Bush in the dock at the International Criminal Court. But unfortunately, the ICC is not signed up to by the Americans, so the least we can hope for is to see Tony Blair, and he should be in the dock before Colonel Gaddafi.
But in Gaddafi's case, do you see him going before the court? I mean, there is a warrant out for his arrest. Do you think it'll come to fruition? This is for the court to decide, but I think it would be very disappointing if they just went along with what NATO appears to be doing here, which is simply to scapegoat Gaddafi, where what's going on there is a civil war, and we have to leave the Libyan people to decide. We can't go marching around the world saying who we want to rule various countries, and I think it's totally out of order for the British and NATO particularly to be saying that Colonel Gaddafi is not fit to run his country. That's for the people of Libya to decide, not for NATO. All right, investigative journalist Tony Gosling joining us from London. Thank you.